All right. Well, we worked to distill down the top 7 topics that we identified that would help you be successful in your organization with decisions. And these are platform knowledge, solution architecture, development standards, customization, scoping projects, long-term support, and upgrade planning. So we're going to pack a lot of info in a very short amount of time for you today. So we'll start off, we're going to talk about number 1, and you have at your place there, you should have a note page that breaks down these topics and give you a space for some notes if that helps any. So the importance of platform knowledge, that's our number 1 discussion to start off with.
Sure. So team enablement is very important, especially when you're starting your company down the decisions path. You want to make sure that you're planning everything, that you've got, that you work on your process first. I like to think of it as kind of the first creation. So you never want to apply technology to a bad process. So make sure that when you're looking to choose your projects and kind of choose your backlog, that you're really looking at your processes and which ones make the most sense to do first. Also looking at communicating the benefits to your stakeholders. So really making sure that you've got that kind of change management plan in, because most of the time this is associated with a transformation, a business process transformation, whether you're moving from an old BPM tool to a new one or installing one for the first time. It is very important to consider how people feel about that change and how committed they are to it. And then, of course, to make sure that you're taking advantage of the training, because it is very important that you get the right people involved and you get them trained on the application. Now, granted, Decisions, as you've heard over the past 2 days, has multiple different paths for training. They've got the foundations training that's happening here. They have the Submerse training, and then they also have their developer training that's both asynchronous and classroom. So lots of opportunities there to enable your team.
Yeah, the on-ramp for decisions is a little bit different depending on who we're really enabling. The understanding of basic development fundamentals always applies. And if someone doesn't have a good handle on those concepts like variables and logical operators and databases and software architecture and data types, then that's where we have to start. It's amazing to see that very technically minded people who have never written code are able to learn to develop with decisions all the time, and it's amazing to see. But a basic understanding of development principles is just a must. And if someone's already up to speed on these basic principles, then of course our attention turns to understanding the decisions platform. And Scott mentioned Decisions is very committed to providing training experiences, and I would take advantage of it and encourage my team to. But at the same time, I think we got to be careful. It would not be realistic to expect someone to be highly proficient with decisions through just training alone. As good as the training experiences are, that's just not a realistic expectation. We see people grow the fastest when they identify those real-life problems, and as a result of having these problems identified, they are exploring solutions, trying to understand and grapple with how to best create the solution to that problem, and then they're engaging an experienced resource in some form or fashion, at least from a design standpoint. It's even better if all the way throughout the project they have someone seasoned who they can go to get advice to help plan out the solution. And then we see that cycle really helps create people who are very, very proficient with the platform.
Yep, so to that point, talking about having a trusted advisor role, I can speak from personal experience because part of my onboarding experience was to hire Jason and his team to be that expert that we needed, because while we had an existing BPM tool, we were newbies with Decisions, and as you know, there are a bazillion tools and there's a lot of different ways to implement. So it was really great to have a partner to provide that expertise that you need in the platform, and then typically a solution partner is going to have at least implemented some kind of similar project to what you're currently doing. And they can give you that kind of guidance and support. The big thing is it keeps you from stepping on those landmines, because like data is important. If you mess that up, you kind of messed up your project. It's hard to recover from things like that. So they help you reduce the risk of mistakes and really improve your chance of success and implementation of the platform.
So number 2, solution architecture and leveraging the platform's value. Now, you know, the development system that you sit in front of was really built in such a way to accelerate the development of software solutions. Yet, at the same time, we see people often pass up opportunities to use the pre-built functionality that exists there. And instead, they choose to build it out from scratch. And I think that is really a shame, because you get the most value out of decisions using it for what it was truly designed to do. Imagine a home building project where every light fixture or cabinet or piece of trim, you know, is made from scratch, from base materials like wood, metal, raw wood and metal. You know, nobody builds this way, right? Building this way would take at least 10 times longer and be 10 times more expensive. Thankfully, we can go to Home Depot, we can go to Lowe's, we can buy cabinets, we can buy light fixtures, we can buy trim. These are pre-built modules that then we can install them and configure them for our building project. And I'll tell you this, if you are, you know, if anyone is approaching decisions as only a coding engine, and they are ignoring much of the pre-built concepts and around, you know, the organization and process management, they're leaving a lot on the table, a lot of value on the table from their decisions investment. So a couple of top areas we'll look at today where a pre-existing concept, say in decisions, saves time and saves money would be around, well, we'll look at just a couple of these today, but I would say assignments would be a pretty big one. I would say accounts and security would be a pretty big area as well. And the use of decisions folder structure, that is a really big one. So they're all basic building blocks, and you can assemble them in a lot of different ways to get a lot of different intended behaviors. I want to point out just 2 of those in our time today, but I want to look at assignments with you. You know, here's this native task management methodology. It can be leveraged in a lot of different ways. It has pre-built functionality that includes dates of expiration. You know, the escalation logic that executes after a certain amount of time. We have metadata, we have stats for completion. We have a varied use of actions. We have the ability to complete these using an API. So much flexibility. Assignments can be stored in folders and they can be related to your process. The mere act of using an assignee, whether that be an individual user account or a group, acts as a means of access control, right? And so only the assignee can work the assignment, meaning they can access the assigned form in that case. So the assigned form can really be anything, though. You realize within your application, it could do anything. Think beyond like reviews and approvals. There's a whole nother world of usage that this particular component could fall into. You know, when the assigned form exits, it exits out an outcome path, and then the assignment shuts down, and it's then marked as completed, and the assigned action actually disappears for the assignee. You think about it in your applications, ways that can be leveraged. There's a lot of ways that can be leveraged. It would be really silly to recreate that similar functionality from scratch when you have that all built in. Now, another really important area is the use of native decisions folder structure. I think this is a concept at play in decisions that can easily get overlooked by newer developers, or even some experienced ones. I see it from time to time. This is truly a new way of thinking. Almost everything in decisions is truly a folder. And I'm speaking beyond the obvious folders that you see in the console that you work with, the regular folders or data folders as they're called sometimes, or the designer folders. Beyond that, I'm referring to those folders associated with the entity framework. Like when you create a new case or a flow execution extension, a process folder. a folder extension, or even an entity record, you truly have a folder there to work with. And you can and you should store assignments in those, etc. It provides a way to associate objects together. And you can do that in such a meaningful way. In fact, every entity that you create in Decisions should obviously live somewhere, right? It shouldn't be orphaned or homeless. It should always live in another folder. It should live somewhere. That means that when you create a case, it should be put in a folder somewhere. You create a process folder, even an entity, it should be stored in the Decisions data structure. But what really becomes interesting is how each of these objects these cases and processes and entities are of themselves actually folders that we can place objects inside of. Cases can contain assignments. Cases can contain entities. Folder extensions can contain cases. Process folders can contain entities. Entities are also folders that can contain elements as well. The amount of possibilities here are really endless. We really shouldn't overlook this structure. So when I'm launching processes, say, where I have multiple cases that come into play, and I could use a folder extension to provide a parent container, right, that I could place these cases in and house them. And maybe the folder extension could house metadata about the overall process. And then I have these cases. These could even be different types of cases. I could have completely different data types of cases stored within that process folder that I would create, right? It would allow you to have different types of cases. And they're related together, though, because they're within the same parent. So besides providing a way to relate items together, having parent objects with processes under it, you're also given the ability to have really navigation features just by associating in that hierarchy. You could have a folder page with items that navigate to case view pages. So when you click on them, it'd be so much easier than if you didn't use this structure. So to recap, a few benefits of using the native Decisions folder structure: enhanced ability to relate objects together, simplified navigation capabilities, browsing from parent to child, and simplified reporting. There's 3 major benefits. So I recommend you use this to your advantage. Use the Decisions folder construct. It's meant to be leveraged, and it gives the developer a lot of power. Don't leave value on the table.
So folder structures are very important. One of the most important things for the success of your Decisions lifecycle is understanding your data. Understanding the life cycle of your data, how it's collected, how it's stored, where it's stored, what the rules are around it. So really understanding where your organization is in their data governance and data provenance process and what those policies are. Looking at the data in the project that you're getting ready to start or that may be underway and saying, okay, is the data normal? Do we have standard data with one-to-many relationships that fit into a regular database? Do we have redundancy? Do tables exist in multiple places? Is there an opportunity to optimize that data before we apply technology to it? And then really digging into how do you transform that data with your project? Is it in line with the rules of your organization? And once you're done with that, what happens to that data? How long can you store it? Where can you store it? Do you have the buzzword of the day, GDPR issues? If you're going international, do you need right to forget? What's the data profile? Is it considered private data? Is it considered proprietary? Is it public? All of these things have to be considered when you're building your projects and when you're really in the planning phase. If you don't do that up front, it will bite you. Voice of experience.
So number 3, development standards of quality. This is a really important one. Decisions provides this single unified platform for development. Yep. A single shared platform. That's a wonderful thing, right? I would say it could be a curse to you. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I would help you today realize the need for strategic vision in the area of organization in your console. Hopefully, it'll save you some time, some frustration, and maybe even an outage or two. You know, the project, as it's defined in decisions, is really a sacred thing, and it should be treated as such. Here's this collection of all the designer elements, objects that make up a discrete unit of functionality. It could be an entire application. It also could represent a smaller piece of a bigger application. But this is the thing you're going to be promoting to the upper environments, to QA, to staging, to prod. It's the discrete unit of functionality you're promoting. This area is so important, and it catches so many developers off guard that result in a mess, that Decisions is making some big changes here. And if you've heard from the roadmap in version 9, we're going to be putting some Decisions has decided to put some nice fence posts around the project to help people not go off the rails, as it often happens today. So if projects are so important, it goes without saying that how you manage projects is vital. And I recommend a couple of things. I recommend that you name the folder housing your project's designer elements the same as the project name, so that when you're looking for your project, it's very, very straightforward to find where these items live. Easy to recognize, where you can see it in the studio very cleanly. Another tip I would have for you is to, carefully review those items when you're checking things in and out of the repository. Don't get too fast on that click. Look at it carefully. There's been so many situations where developers have created items, designer elements in the designer folder structure of one project, say, let's call it project B, and then they've moved some items into project A's folder structure, yet, it maintained its association with project B. Have you ever seen this? If you've worked with Decisions for very long, you've probably experienced it. And now you have items living in project B, project B's folder structure that belong to project A, or actually the other way around. Associated with project B, live in project A's folder structure. And a lot of times, new developers don't notice the situation until they go to promote it. They promote it, say, to QA, they promote project A, everything looks good, maybe they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the reports as they were checking it in the repository. And now we have objects that are missing from the project because they thought they were there, but they're actually with another project. You would have had some dependency warnings when you checked it out. So it really pays to pay close attention when you were checking things in and out. I oftentimes will group those according to path. You have the ability to group when you're checking things in and out. You can group those items, look at the path, because that's a great way to see what's in my folder structure and what's not. And it should be a kind of a red flag, like, oh, I see something that's outside my folder structure. That's not expected, of course, because you might see groups are going to be outside. Maybe you'll see system constants. There are certain things that should be outside or will be outside. But if you're seeing something from another project, this is a concern. It should be a red flag for you.
Yeah.
So it's good to catch those. Another one is the power of naming. I think that the power of naming is just not talked about enough. The single platform brings together all these amazing efficiencies, but if you don't give some strategic thought to this, it can really be a mess. And I find that developers are sometimes the worst at naming things. Sometimes developers can be the absolute worst at naming things. They're used to these situations where the actual development environments are very segmented. They're isolated and contained. But when they enter into Decisions, now we have a global, a single pane of glass where all these things live. And the problem is naming generically. That is the problem, naming generically. And with data types, imagine with data types, if would be wrong with me naming something an account? Well, interesting, because Decisions has a built-in object called account. There could be other projects that have the object account. You say, yeah, but Jason, we have this namespace. What's the big deal? We got the namespace. But I would say that you have some elements some places in the UI where you don't necessarily see it, or it's hard to see it because maybe the name of the data type is large and it cuts it off. It's not always apparent. I would recommend being very, very strategic with names. you'd want to be able to pick your element out of a lineup. I mean, just a first glance, understand what it is. So I recommend using a naming paradigm where we really take the first part of the name represents the project name. So every single element in that project has that name, all right? Then we describe what this thing does. And then we describe the type. And you're like, oh, but Jason, there's different icons. There's, you know, I can see what type. Well, okay. There are some UI experiences that don't really highlight that. I would say I would name a flow a flow. I would name a rule a rule. I would name a form a form. All the way through the experience. It helps. It really does. It really does help. And, you know, seeing it at a glance and knowing what it is for is just so valuable. Now imagine this. Imagine even beyond data types. Data types are globally searchable, and you're commonly globally searching for data types. So you can see the need for that. But imagine this. In your toolbox, when you search for something, it's searching for it's searching flows, it's searching rules. So how often do you see situations where maybe newer developers are searching for a piece of functionality only to be shown a subflow in the results in the toolbox, and then they add it to their flow? And they've just created a dependency on a project because that's a subflow that was actually not a built-in thing. So if I would have named it, say, create account, if I took this one and I just called it create account, and I had a colleague search for create account in the toolbox and they find it, drag, drop it. Maybe they don't bother to open up and look at it and see where it's actually from. You know, now I created a dependency. And maybe I'll break their project if we're both working on these projects at the same time, right? Where if I would have named it this way, and they found this in the toolbox, it would be very, very clear that this is part of an existing project. This isn't a built-in element. This isn't some default entity, a system entity. This is part of a project. And then they would be much more likely to handle that with care, right? Handle that with care. So then, you know, if we're going to talk about standards and development standards, the topic of reuse is just so important. You know, I'm a big fan of reuse within a project. I think that makes sense. Creating subflows that represent chunks of functionality that you can reuse within the project, that makes absolute sense. But I think the problem that we start to see is reuse between projects. And my suggestion is to treat that with a lot more scrutiny. Because heavy reuse may seem like a good idea, until you get into real-world release management, and then it breaks down very rapidly. So I advocate to with my clients to implement a very thoughtful process when it comes to reuse. I'll share it with you now. You know, any candidate for reuse between projects should carry a big enough advancement as a time saver, or it should be a case where centrally managing it is vital. You know, reuse between projects should really be reserved for those situations where the benefits outweigh the risks and that extra burden of release management, because that's a big deal of having this shared resource to deal with. So if a component in your project is simple, it's fast to produce, and there isn't value in centrally managing it, and it doesn't change often, I'm an advocate for simply allowing each project to have its own version of it. This unencumbers the release management process. I don't have to worry about one project breaking another project. You know, I'll say this, if the effort, you know, justifies having a shared resource, then, okay, I'll treat the project as very well marked as a shared project. Maybe I have a folder called shared, and all of the shared projects live within it. And these projects, you know, their intent, don't miss that point, these projects are meant to be consumed by other projects. They're not intended to be standalone. They're built with the purpose of being reused. They're projects whose sole job in life is to be, you know, consumed by another application. They're not standalone. So this allows us, if we do it this way, we can avoid the spaghetti projects, right? Where we have this shared project concept that I just described is radically different than, you know, taking some aspect of a standalone application and then tying it to another, having it depend on another standalone application. I mean, that's really where we create this spaghetti code really easily. Since the project is a discrete unit of promotion to upper environments, depending on other projects can require a lot of coordination, and it involves a lot of risks if that coordination doesn't happen. All right, so the next thing we want to mention here is code review, or in this case, maybe low code review. But imagine this, you have a team of developers, they have varying skill levels, maybe an expert on board assisting them, maybe not, but what's important is you want to have a non-authoring developer conduct a review of code of each design to really see what's going on with it. You know, with decisions, there's multiple ways to accomplish things. And the same objectives can be done in a lot of different manners. And imagine these code reviews are a way to ensure like that optimal decisions were made in the approach. Having another set of eyes, you know, will improve the overall result. And it also has this wonderful side effect of acquainting others on the team with how the application works, which is great because you never know when another team member is going to need to pitch in to make enhancements or maybe adjustments or corrections. So number 4 we have here is what to know about customization. Customization, this is a big one. And there are some areas where we see customization. I mean, I'll tell you this, you look across the marketplace, you'll be hard-pressed to find a solution with the flexibility of decisions. Because, I mean, one major aspect of that flexibility is the ability to customize. And we can customize with steps that are actually custom steps that you drag and drop into your flow. You can customize with JavaScript controls that maybe you're leveraging on a form or on a page. And then the ability to use CSS to really make things look and feel how you want it to and behave even in certain ways. Amazing ability, but before you deeply invest into customization, you need to count the cost.
Yep. What he's really saying is proceed with caution. There's a lot of reward, but there's also a lot of risk. So everything that you customize, you now own. Very important point to drive home. So if you create custom steps, custom JavaScript controls, then when you decide to upgrade, you've got to test all of that before you upgrade and after. So it's very important to understand that. My firm, we actually have a very well-developed design system for UI. So part of our risk-reward ratio was implementing our design system and decisions. So we have custom skinned the entire platform with our design system, which means that when we upgrade, like we're doing currently, we literally have to test every page to make sure the CSS still applies the way it was originally. So there are definitely some things you need to look at. You could also inadvertently increase your security risk. So if you've got custom steps that do certain things, like my firm, when we send anything out to a customer, before we implement that, it has to go through a full penetration test. So anything new that you create goes through a penetration test and gets tested. So you really have to make sure that the code that you're creating, all these customizations, are not increasing your risk to your customer data.
All right, so number 5, how to scope new projects.
All right, so especially when you're first starting out, quick wins are very important. You want to solve the biggest business problem you can as quickly as you can. So you want to get that MVP together because you want to be able to demonstrate the value of the platform and really start to win hearts and minds. That was what we did. We immediately chose 2 of our biggest points and immediately implemented, with Jason's help, those solutions. And what that did is it motivated the team. The stakeholders started to see what decisions could do. The floodgates opened. And all of a sudden your backlog is 4 years long. So you really have to take a look at that. So how do you identify the quick wins? Of course, talk to your stakeholders. Make sure that you're communicating. And my rule is I always communicate more than I think I need to, because it's never enough. And then, of course, work with your business partners to prioritize those opportunities. You're not going to be able to boil the ocean. You can't do everything all at once. So choose the diamonds in the pile of stones there. All right. Agile release planning. This is my favorite topic. I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, so process is kind of my jam. So when you're looking at how you prioritize these efforts and create your backlog and your release plan, there's some basic things you have to do here. You identify your initiative, identify your key stakeholders. This is probably the most important part because inevitably some stakeholder will red flag your project if you don't have them all taken care of. Gathering your requirements. You want to spend most of your time in these phases because if you gather your requirements and you spend more time in design, implementation goes much smoother. Then of course you prioritize it. The way my team prioritizes, we calculate the business value with our business partners, and then we go to the dev team and have them do story points, and then we take those, put them over each other and create an R value, and use that number then to prioritize our requirements. Now what that does is give you the ability to use data to create a release plan. And then from that, you communicate the release plan, get consensus on it from your stakeholders, but then track and adjust is the most important part. This is a plan, it's going to change. I can't tell you the amount of times I've gotten to the finish line, we're getting ready to deliver, we go to UAT and the customer says, you know, it'd be great. I'm like, UAT is not requirements gathering, but okay. So it's important to know that this is a plan. It's great to have structure, but it is just a plan.
All right, so supporting your applications in the long term.
Another important thing to think about, which some people may forget as they're building these wonderful applications. We're all, you know, decisions is big on build. You know, you can build it. Anybody can do it. We're democratizing development. But then you have to think about how do you support this after it goes into production and who's supporting it. So as you're doing that, you have to think about how complex is the application. Is this something that's going to require someone with business expertise to support it? Have they agreed to do that? Do you have stakeholder concurrence on that? Who's your target audience? Is this an application that's being built for 30 people or 3,000? Because the support model is totally different for that. What kind of a budget, if any, do you have for this? Typically with low code, people kind of forget about the budget for support. So you want to make sure you remember that. And then, you know, what is the desired level of customer satisfaction? And it's kind of an interesting thought because you think, you know, we always want our customers to be satisfied, but it may just be that we just need to make sure they're cared for. They don't have to be delighted all the time. So you really have to consider what is the level of customer satisfaction that you need to have with your application. All right. Application administration. So this is where we talk about how we support the application and who supports the application. There is a world like in the old days when you needed to update a parameter, you put in a ticket, a developer grabbed the ticket, and then they went into the system and said, okay, in this ERP system, I need to add NetSuite. And so they would do that. There is a concept of creating an admin console in decisions where you could, for example, if I've got a team of data center excellence that actually manages our data, and they can be the data trustee, and if we need to update the ERP system that flows to several different applications and decisions, I can give them an admin console and allow them to go in and make updates to that ERP system, and then it flows to all the other systems downstream. So now you've got the ability to compartmentalize the administration and the business administration of your application. It allows a lot of flexibility and really kind of helps to shift that compliance burden from your development team to the business users where it should be.
So when you're architecting your solution, it's really wise to take in consideration those daily operational activities that are going to take place once the application goes live. And I mean, every process should have an operational owner, someone who's responsible for the daily care and feeding of the process. Because without fail, there's going to be these points in the process where some level of support is needed. A user may not understand or remember what the process lifecycle is, and they need to reach out to someone for a refresher, understand why their submission isn't moving forward, for example. You know, real life scenarios dictate that sometimes processes go awry. They're interrupted in unexpected ways, and they may need investigation. They may require an intervening action. Someone must be prepared to do that. And let's call this role an application administrator. This person does not typically need to be technical, but they need to have a good understanding of the overall process flow. So what does a application administrator typically do? You know, they would change the assignees on assignments. Someone goes on vacation, they're managing that type of thing. They're adding impersonation for people who are on vacation. They intervene on stuck processes. They restart processes or force closure, for example. They also provide a contact point for process participants, and they investigate all those reported abnormalities that may come up. You know, during the development process, this person's role must be considered, and functionality should be built out to accommodate their day-to-day administrative activities. I mean, you may have actions that are very specific to this role, actions that allow intervening on a process. There may be dashboard considerations for this role as well. A dashboard that maybe shows all the processes across the whole company of a given type, and then allows details to be viewed. Interfaces that would not typically be available to the process participants or even other business users. At the end of the day, though, you really want to do what you can to protect your development team from the day-to-day care and feeding of applications as much as possible, because so that they can do the work they do best, and that's innovating with the platform. And you know, your plans for steady state really should include these plans. So, upgrade planning. This is an important one. You know, the decisions platform is constantly being improved. I mean, the platform of this size, bugs are being addressed, corrected, the methodologies are being adjusted. I mean, you see the overall framework being optimized, performance is being improved, security posture is being addressed. We see so much happening all the time. I'll tell you this, if you do not make deliberate and strategic plans for upgrading, you will find yourself very far behind in releases. No plan means you will fall behind. And today I'd like to give you some practical advice for completing upgrades. Now, I typically do not advise that you use your, actually wind upgrade, we want to talk about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are reasons to upgrade. I mean, everyone needs to consider kind of what the critical mass is. I mean, you don't want to apply every upgrade. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. I mean, there's multiple upgrades a year. I mean, technically, I guess you could, but you really need to decide, you know, talk to your users and really look at the cost-benefit analysis. You know, what are you getting for the upgrade? Because you have to consider that when you're upgrading, you're looking at everything that you've created. So you literally need to test all of your applications, all of your custom JavaScript controls, make sure all of your CSS still applies correctly. You've really got to do a full regression test when you're upgrading. So it is important to weigh that against the value that it provides. We're actually in the middle of an upgrade right now because we had some really great features in 8.10. So it is very important to consider that and to talk to your users and really identify that ROI.
So the upgrade pathway. I do not recommend that you use your development instance for upgrade testing. I think that is a very bad idea. Why? Well, it interrupts your development cadence and impacts your progress. I mean, if a major blocking issue is encountered, you've just upgraded all your projects and your whole code base, and you could have to, I mean, if you hit a blocking issue, you might have to reinstall the previous version and using a backup of the database. That's not good. With all that happening, you know, if you need to make a change to a production release project, you really can't, at least following the normal pathway, until you've resolved all that. So your development environment is essentially dysfunctional at that point, and you really don't want out-of-sync code. You don't want an out-of-sync code base. So instead, I recommend that another instance be used for upgrade testing. If you're an enterprise license customer, you know you could use your test environment for this. It keeps your dev, your QA, and your staging environments unencumbered and fully operational during that. If you're a standard license customer, you could procure a non-prod license just for upgrade testing. That's one way to do it. But you could also potentially stand up a local on-premise VM, get a copy of your database, install the version of decisions you're currently running right now against that dev database copy, and you're running a trial instance at that point, right? So you have 30 days, so you just started the clock in which other people can access it at least, and you need to move the project forward, but that's a way to do it. So here's the order of operations that I would recommend for an upgrade process. You know, start with your testing instance, your upgrade testing instance, making sure that all your projects are there, all of your production projects are there, and they all work, number one. You're on your original version, you haven't upgraded yet, but you're just making sure everything is there and it works, right? That's number one. Then you go ahead and complete the upgrade process, upgrading the testing instance, and then at that point, you're going to want to test every single application that's in a production state. And I recommend that every flow really be opened and examined as well, visually. Ideally, you should write a test plan, and that way it's a nice cookie cutter. Every time you do it, I test these things. Here's how I test an application. Write a nice test plan, a series of steps to take with a nice pass-fail column, and then some comments. So you can document what's occurred for that step. You should have a master list of production applications that you're testing anyway, and this gives you a tracker for the overall status. You know, you ask, what kinds of things do you see go wrong during an upgrade? And I'll tell you this, we see a few things. Occasionally, we see steps behave differently. That can cause some problems. In some cases, we see that steps are confused about their inputs. They might need to just be remapped. We see that from time to time. We see customizations that no longer work, as you could imagine. Sometimes custom steps stop working when the .NET version changes, as you could imagine. Sometimes, if you have a JavaScript control, if decisions changed attributes on the page, maybe hooks it was using, it no longer can work. We see that quite a bit. And, you know, with that in mind, once that testing and review is completed, you're going to want to go in and resolve all of those issues. And I typically would resolve them on my upgrade server, my testing server, just to test the upgrade. I would do it there. I would, you know, it can be very time consuming to do this depending on what's going on. It might be no big deal at all. You might not even find an issue, and that's a great thing, but you could. And now you have reactionary time, you've built it in your schedule, and you have a place to try the fixes. And I usually try the fixes in that testing environment. And then, once I have everything validated and they're all working, I'm like, okay, we have a working code base, we have a plan. So now we can go ahead and upgrade our dev environment, right? Dev environment would then be next. We would cease dev activities at that point for a moment. We would briefly cease those activities, upgrade the dev instance. And then what we would do is we'd implement the same resolutions that we already tested in the test environment. And I guess you could move objects, but I kind of recommend just doing it again. You've documented what you've done. I just go ahead and do it again so that, you know, it's the same fix, but it's the native object as it was already, you know, in dev. I could import and export and things like that, but I often don't. And then at that point, you can kind of test again to make sure you really have things gelled. You're testing, you're exercising these solutions in various ways. And then at that point, you can upgrade QA, okay? You can apply the fixes there. You may go ahead, if necessary, allow business stakeholders to do testing if they're part of that testing cycle. Oftentimes that's the case, and we sort of pause right there for a moment. But then at that point, we can move on to staging and prod. And very quickly after I upgrade them, I need to promote the fixes that I've placed into dev up to those upper environments, or obviously the applications are broken initially. And it's really important, you know, these activities are very doable. Like, they're doable, but they require a little bit of thought and planning. It's doable, but you just don't want to get too far behind on versions. I would caution you, don't want to get too far behind. It gets harder the further behind you get.
Eat the elephant in small bites is what you say.
You really should. And really, if you rely on a platform like this, it just should be part of your normal practice. Like, it just comes with the territory. You're like, oh, but I don't want to mess with that. Well, but that's just part of work on a platform like this. And really, if you can make it part of your cadence, you're just used to it, you build it into what you do, it's something that can be very, very doable, and you can get good at it. So, All right. Do we have any questions at this point? I appreciate you guys joining us.